Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Well, in the last episode, I was joined by Darren Morrow, Senior Consultant here at Blackmores, to share his knowledge about the new ISO standard for occupational health at work, which is the guidelines for managing psychosocial risks. So I'm delighted that Darren's back again so we can unpack the standard in a bit more detail. Welcome back, Darren.
Hi Mel, thanks for having me back.
I'm really pleased that you're on the show because I think some of these areas are absolutely fascinating, and all organisations are affected by mental health, and it's really important that we do address this at an organisational level. You know, I think a lot of people think that this is just about particular individuals, but actually it's the way that an organisation can structure the management of its occupational health and to be able to identify and manage those psychosocial risks and hazards. So I know that there are three main areas really that the standard focuses on when we look at applying this in a practical aspect, and they're the three areas that I'm going to be getting hopefully a bit more information from you on for our ISO Show listeners, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Great, okay. So I mean, just to summarise, those three areas are how work is organised, social factors as well across the organisation, and then finally the work environment itself, including equipment and also hazardous tasks. So let's kick off with the first one then, Darren, aspects of how work is organised. So can you kind of just share with us some of the key considerations that an organisation should be potentially adopting to improve their management system?
Well, this area actually is quite an expansive area when you look at it. We're looking at roles and expectations of individuals, job control or autonomy, job demands, organisational change management, remote and isolated work, the working hours, and even job security. So there's quite a lot of areas that can actually be explored through this.
It's pretty diverse, isn't it?
It's huge when you start looking at it. Obviously, we'll touch on some of those areas. So if we're looking at roles and expectations, just some simple things like giving somebody a job description that is related to their job so they know what they're supposed to do, any kind of training and support, avoiding any role conflict, you know, sort of giving them a task but then finding that is in contradiction to other areas. Giving them clear guidelines and expectations of what their role is expected, you know, and making sure that avoiding what I'd call frequent changes or any unexpected change, you know, back again to that consultation participation through 45,000. Talk to the individuals, let them know what is expected of them so that they know what to deliver. When we're looking at the job controller autonomy, nothing worse that most people will experience is being told you can do one thing but then being told you've got to get approval for something very similar. You know, let people know what those guidelines are, let them know where they are, and give them control over some of their workload. We've hopefully gone beyond the micromanagement days where you just tell people I want this, that, you know, and have it all lined up for them. Some people like it, other people like to be able to manage their workflow because they have a different way of working. The job demands is a significant one for me. You know, you can underuse people's skills. You can actually continually expose them to things that may not be right, that they should be avoided, you know, depending on the time of day, how the people are feeling, and having too much to do in a certain time. Look at the workload, look at what they're doing. Don't just keep piling stuff on, say it's got to be done by 5 o'clock, because that's where you're going to have the person having a bit of a meltdown, really. We've all done it, you know, throw your toys in the air, pick up the pieces and try and get it all done by 5 o'clock. But that doesn't put you in a good frame of mind to get the job done properly. This is where you start getting the poor workmanship, you know, the mistakes, the errors, that's where they can start occurring. But that's the unrealistic expectation side of it. Again, fragmented, meaningless tasks, you know, people not knowing what they're doing and why they're doing it. or exposure to events or situations that can cause them trauma. I mean, that's difficult in some areas, but look at the way the work is and avoid putting people into a position where they could end up being confronted, whether it's aggression or distress through the workplace. Try to avoid putting that into people's working life. Again, we're looking at remote and isolated work is a key one in today's world that we're living in. Those people that are working far away from home, that have to travel away from families and friends, those people that are working their life on Teams or Zoom at the moment, they may live on their own or they may be at home with their family, but those people living on their own, the only people they see could be through a video screen. How's that helping them? How are they coping? And the working hours, we're in a world now where before we all had commutes and we all managed our commute, and suddenly we're in working time during a commute. It's working hours in some cases, and I've spoken to people where they've found their working hours have actually gone up because they've no longer got their hour drive to work. That's become their work time. So from a management side, managers need to appreciate that just because they're not travelling, they don't need to always be at the computer on a Teams call. Not going to make them any more productive in some cases. It's a huge area to focus on, to look at and to study, to be honest.
Yeah, I think in terms of things that organisations can do to address this, I think it's looking at that balance of workload, isn't it? The location of employees, and also even within the working day. So I know that when we first went into lockdown and we switched to working remotely via Teams, for me personally, I'd be having meetings back to back. I didn't have any kind of breathing space to even nip to the toilet or make a cup of tea or even just collect my thoughts and write up my notes from that meeting. You'd be straight into the next one. The knock-on effect of that can actually lead to stress, or you're not necessarily in the right frame of mind for being clear-headed for going into the next meeting because your head's still in the previous meeting. So it's about making sure that you've got those buffers and those gaps between the workloads so you can get, I guess, maximum capacity and productivity out of all of your employees.
Yeah, I think when it all first started, it was so easy for Teams meetings to be 9 till 10 or 10 till 12 and get half an hour lunch. And you just bounce between meetings and then you realise you're not being productive because you're just sitting on a Teams call. Then if you're lucky enough to dual screen, you find you're on a Teams call but you might be doing something different on your other screen. So are you listening to the meeting or not? So you're almost back to that. It is an old sort of situation where, do I really need to be at that meeting? When you was in the workplace, you looked at your calendars, you looked at your available time, and it was like, do I need to be there? Is it important? When you're on Teams, you're at home, you're missing a lot of different things, and it made people think differently. Not always for the good, but it just, back to, I think after the first 6 months, people started realising, actually, this is still work. We still need to plan, and we still need to be organised. And I think we're getting there. Employers, and all of us, we just need to take a very good, careful look at what we're doing and is it the right thing to do at that time.
Yeah, and I guess for organisations that have shift patterns as well, that might have 24/7 operations, they'll realise that, the importance of making sure that you get that balance right when you're switching the shifts over, the shift patterns, because that can also have a knock-on effect if people aren't being able to get a good night's sleep or a good morning sleep, depending on the shift pattern.
Yes, definitely. The world we live in now, with organisations having sort of more of a global footprint, we've done it. We've had audits with companies in different parts of the world. So time zones are different. You could be talking to someone mid-afternoon your time and it's early morning somebody else's time. The one thing with the video calls now is we have to be cognizant of those time zones as opposed to I'm just an hour down the road, because that was just a travel journey. Now that doesn't exist. So we need to think broader.
Yeah, that's true. I think so many different variables now affecting, those psychosocial risks as a result of remote working, definitely. So moving on to the social factors in the workplace then, I think this is a bit of a grey area because quite often these are intangible risks that businesses face, but they do actually have tangible consequences. So if you're looking at leadership, for example, looking at accountability, fairness and things like that. These are all contributing factors, aren't they, when we're looking at occupational health and safety. Could you just walk us through some of these social factors that we need to take into consideration?
Yes, social factors is one of those areas that has been quite difficult for a lot of companies to try and understand when they're putting their current management system together and managing it moving forward. But in some areas you need to be looking at, we've covered leadership, but interpersonal relationships. Can individuals as well as management, can they all talk to each other? Can they identify what's going right, wrong? Can they share information, whether it's good, bad? It's having that communication skills area to make it work. Just poor relationships between managers and individuals, whether it's managers, supervisors, those individuals, whether it's a client, can be difficult. Poor relationships can actually impact a lot of different people in different ways. So an individual may not want to go to work because they don't get on with their manager, or they don't want to work with that client that day, or so it's that impact it has on the individual in that regards. And the harassment and bullying, obviously a lot of the areas of standards and different approaches now through health and safety and that is looking at more harassment, bullying in the workplace. But just victimisation can be perceived in different ways. An individual may feel that they're always being put on by their boss, but their boss may not actually realise that. It's different opinions, different approaches, so these all have that impact on those individuals. And just lack of social support. Has the individual got someone to go and talk to? In a company, is HR available just to go and have a chat?
Yeah, I think it's useful to have somebody who's impartial, who isn't your line manager, and that you can actually go and speak to. I think in some cases as well, I know that the mental health first aider course that I mentioned in the previous podcast is really popular. So, possibly having a couple of nominated mental health first aiders, so if somebody has got an issue or concern, they can go to them. Or if it's something that's affecting the management system, why not go to the person that's responsible for the management system too? Because it may be, if it's to do with communication, there might be an opportunity for improvement there when it does come to communication channels. So there's lots of different opportunities, I think, for those people that are responsible for management system to listen to these issues and concerns and to try and address them. So you've got clear and transparent policies and procedures to support employees and make sure that they have got the right channels to be able to communicate their concerns.
Definitely. These sort of areas really stem from leadership or top management. The people at the higher levels making decisions, they need to be clear with what they want. The management styles need to be open. In some ways, some people, managers may need to change their style just to get an opinion across to a different person. So they've got to be open. But having the lack of accountability or fairness, not listening to people, this all has an impact on those individuals at some point, which basically goes back to where we said before, having that impact on their well-being.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think, making sure that organisations have got clear policies and systems in place to be able to, report on harassment issues as well, because we know that, many organisations have equality and diversity policies and procedures and systems in place so that, no organisation, is discriminating against any employees, any individuals when it comes to, gender identity or race or disability or age or, their religion or beliefs. So again, it comes back to having a clear and transparent process for managing that within an organisation. And that then comes back to your management system documentation, doesn't it? But also not just having a piece of paper, but actually putting that into practice, which, leads back to what you were saying about leadership. And ultimately, it's about the company's culture, isn't it? How they manage these things.
Yes, and that is usually the key word, culture. It's difficult to put the right culture in if you've got the wrong people trying to put it in. And culture is a very easy thing to, I'm not going to say break, but for it to fragment if it's not being led in the right way and people are not following those values. It's very easy for other people not to follow, which is back to the leadership area. And you want to make sure that you've got the support mechanism in place so that with the right culture, people will know they can go and talk to someone. They know they'll get clear direction. They'll know they get support when they ask for it. That is the culture, is everybody working together. And that to me is a key area.
So moving on then to the third and final main consideration, which is the work environment, including equipment and hazardous tasks. So what are the sorts of things that we should be looking out for here, Darren?
Well, this will be difficult in some areas because it could be quite subjective with people saying they haven't got the right tools for the job. But obviously this is where your risk assessments and your reviews and your communications with all the individuals doing the job comes into play. But obviously if we've got the wrong equipment, you're asking people to do a job without the right equipment. A lot of us, we work with computers, laptops, software, being asked to do something, and if the computer's old and doesn't keep up, it's difficult. If you've been asked to do something and you haven't got the right software, these things are difficult. They all come with a cost and they have to be evaluated. But if you're in a production type industry and you've not got the right equipment to do a job, that can start putting stress on an individual. They'll try and find a way to do the job, which actually can increase the dangers and get more into near miss situations where they're using the wrong tool to do the wrong job. So it can be very, very difficult. Other areas we'd be looking at poor maintenance regimes. So when we do health and safety audits, it's planned preventive maintenance is a big topic. Making sure equipment is reviewed, it's suitable, it's maintained, it's safe to use, the individuals have been trained. These all go together. So if you've got a poor workplace condition and you've got poor space and lighting and you've got poor equipment, you're putting yourself into a position where individuals can be stressed, they're not either paying attention, or they're potentially putting themselves at harm because they're trying to do the right thing. And it's a very, very bad area for anyone to go down because, you're increasing the risk quite significantly.
Great, thanks for that, Darren. So we've covered off the social factors as well as the work environment, equipment, hazardous tasks, and also the other sorts of aspect, which was how work is organised. Before we go, we mentioned about risk assessments and the importance of those in a previous podcast and how ISO 45003 can now play a part when it comes to organisational risk assessments. So that's one tool, but what are other ways that an organisation can identify those psychological hazards in the workplace?
Well, there are several ways that any organisation can identify these psychosocial hazards. Some areas we can look at are reviewing job descriptions, making sure that they are giving the right information, they are reflective of the individual's job, etc. Other areas we're analysing the tasks, any schedules, the location of the work. We'll be looking at the consulting of the workers, the individuals doing the job, any clients and any other interested parties. So this is where you pull in everyone then that are involved with the job, that are involved with the organisation. And then just analysing any performance that is there, any worker surveys, any standardised questionnaires and audits that is undertaken within the business. Pulling that information together and looking for those hazards and then looking for basically improvement in any of the working practices.
Yeah, that's great, Darren. Some fantastic examples there. I think when it comes to looking at this as an organisation, it is worthwhile looking more strategically as well. So, you could look at employee attrition. So how many employees have you lost over last year and what were the causes of that? Did you do exit interviews and was stress or any other mental health issue a factor when it came to them to actually leaving the organisation? So that's great. Is there anything else that you'd like to add then, Darren, before we wrap up today?
Well, I think it's a standard that I'd say anyone listening to this podcast should be seriously considering just reading through, irrelevant of whether they've got ISO 45 or 9 or whatever, any of the standards. If they're looking to actually improve their own business, looking to make it better for themselves, they're basically the individuals that work for them. For those companies, I think they've got 45. I think this can be an invaluable tool to actually take what we'd call that next step on their improvement. Let's look at, are we doing it right? Can we now make that improvement? Blend this in with that topic of consultation and participation that we know some organisations do struggle with. This basically opens up what I'd call the floodgates. It will help companies embrace that area of well-being within their business. If they didn't know where to start, this would help them. It would help them look at any process they already have internally that they thought was good, bad, indifferent, it doesn't matter. Look at it again with a fresh pair of eyes, with a new guidance document basically. It's there, use it. That's what I would say.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Darren. And also thanks for joining us on the previous podcast too. That's been brilliant. And just a reminder for our ISO show listeners, we have got a white paper that Darren has produced on this standard ISO 45003. So please feel free to get in touch with us. You can do that via the link in the podcast, the ISO show notes on whichever media player you're listening to, or hop over to one of our websites, which is blackmoresuk.com or the isologyhub.com. So until the next episode, thanks very much for joining us. We really appreciate every single one of our ISO show listeners join us for these podcasts, and hopefully together we can raise awareness of the fantastic difference that these standards can make. Thanks once again, and I look forward to catching up with you on the next ISO show.
Looking to use ISO standards to drive better business practice? Contact us at blackmoresuk.com to access further information and book your free 15-minute call.